Hey everyone, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we are going to talk about two guns, kind of, because this is kind of two in one. The Mosin Nagant M91 and the Finnish M91 24, or M24, as the Finnish M24s are simply a converted M91, which this happens to be. So, this is a really cool gun. This does not belong to me. It belongs to my friend Donovan, who's behind the camera. Hi, Donovan.
Hello.
And this actually did used to be mine at one point in time. It's a really awesome rifle. If you saw, I'm standing on a bit of a hill here, and that first shot, I just about fell over. I'm not very well balanced on this this knob that I'm standing on, but this is a good shooter. It works well. And this also will be kicking off our look at Finnish Mosins, and as such will probably be a somewhat long video. So let's go ahead and get going into the gun room and talk about some Mosin history. So as we've already mentioned, we are going to be discussing not just one, but in fact two rifles today. We're going to be starting by talking about the Mosin Nagant M91, of which is what this gun would have started its life as. And then we're going to be, when we kind of reach the end of our story there, which will be basically with the fall of the Russian Empire, we will be transitioning to talking about the M24, which is what this gun would technically be considered in its current form. So, the M91 originally was known as the three-line rifle model 1891. Before we go any farther with that, that's probably not a name most of you have heard. Mosin Nagant, that's what we call it here in the West. Even in Russia, they didn't really call it the three-line rifle for very long. They called it Mosin's rifle. But three lines is not that hard of a concept to wrap your head around. 7.62, this gun is chambered in 7.62 by 54mm rimmed, or 7.62 Mosin. 7.62 is 30 caliber. One line is 0.1 inches, or 10 caliber. So 30 caliber, 1, 2, 3. 3 line. One line equals 0.1 inches, which also equates to 7.62. I'm not going to try doing the math on what one line is in millimeters, but you get the idea. 3 lines equals 7.62 or 30 caliber. So now we will move on to why this gun actually came to be. So our story actually kind of begins a long while before this gun, or over a decade at least, before this gun actually came to be, with the Russo-Ottoman War. Not a war that most of us in the West have really heard much about. It was a fairly short war. It ranged from 1877 to 1878. Though for the Russians, I imagine it didn't feel short, because they were going up against Ottoman soldiers armed with Winchester repeaters when the Russians themselves were using a single-shot rifle. I don't remember the name of the rifle. It's not one that I'm familiar with. I'll post the name of it, so if you're interested in looking it up, be my guest. If we ever find one, I mean, which I've never seen one, so I doubt we will, but if we ever do and manage to pick it up and find ammo for it, then, discussion for another day. But basically, this led to a multitude of instances where the Russians were slaughtered. A particularly bad example of this was the Battle of Pleven. At least I believe that's how you say it. Pleven. Seems pretty simple, but I've been wrong before. But this battle convinced Russian military leaders that it was time to change to a multi-shot rifle. So from 1882 to about 1889, Russia was doing everything they could to compile examples of multi-shot rifles to try and develop their own gun. They had 3 inventors primarily working on this. Captain Sergei Mosin, who, considering the name, you probably already know where this is going, and Leon Nagant, who we've discussed about before, Leon or Leon. I still don't know if it's said one way or the other. I would assume Leon because he's Belgian. But this guy is who brought us the Nagant revolver, which is right there. I don't know if it's in screen, but it's above my head a little ways. Right there. We did a video on that in the past. You can check it out. And we briefly mentioned this rifle in that video because of talking about Leon Nagant. So you had those two and Captain Zinoviev. Zinoviev and Nagant, no, Zinoviev and Mosin put forth a 3-line rifle design. Leon Nagant put forth a 3.5-line rifle design. The commission that was overseeing the testing was torn between Nagant's design and Mosin's design, and so they kind of just combined the best features of both. And you get what you see before us here. It's an old piece. This particular example is Imperial Russian, dated 1913, so originally would have very much been an M91 to the bone, but did undergo some Finnish alterations around the year 1924 to 1927, give or take. And I believe this is where we would be making our transition to talking about Finland. So here we go, officially talking about my favorite peoples to discuss from the early 20th century, the Finns, and their wonderful updates to the kind of stagnant Mosin Nagant design that the Russians stuck with for a very long time with making very few changes. The Finns would eventually make dramatic changes. We're going to be doing a series starting here with the M24 that will cover everything from the M24 to the M39. So M24, M27, M28. The 27 28 will be covered in one video, and then the 28, 30, and 39 will be covered in the final video in this direct series. This would also be the starting point for talking about Russian Mosins, namely the 9130 and the M44. And so this will kind of be a branching series, so could definitely lead to quite a bit of discussion. But Finland, 1917. Russia is in the middle of their revolution, courtesy of one Karl Marx. You may have heard of him. More directly, courtesy of a student of his teachings, which you have most certainly heard of, that individual being one Lenin. Definitely a massive event in history, had massive implications for a lot of countries, and Finland is one of those. Finland now is no longer tethered to Imperial Russia, and by hook or by crook, they're going to make it work. So pretty much right off the bat, you have a brief civil war between what were often referred to as the White Finns and the Red Finns. The White Finns was a more republic-minded group, and then the Red Finns was communist. So the White Finns would win, and now you find yourself with a need to arm your country, and you've got about 190,000 M91s that you've been fighting each other with. So rather than trying to come up with their own design, they did not have the funds to come up with their own design in the first place. But rather than trying to go ahead and force a entirely new design, they just went, well, we'll take this 190,000 M91s that we have and start making some changes to them. These changes are largely very subtle on the M24. They get more dramatic as you go along. Really, some of the changes, you could have an M24 and not notice it just because of not knowing what an SA stamp is, of which we'll be looking at this closer when we go to the tabletop view, but it's just a square with an S and an A stamped in the middle of it, and that is the stamp of the Finnish army. And if it has that stamp, then it was either captured, purchased, or already was in Finland when Finland gained their independence. And the biggest modifications that were made was a improvement to the trigger mechanism. Basically, they just cleaned it up and made sure that everything was aligned properly. A lot of the Russian M91s could have a pretty cheesy feeling trigger, but the Mosins liked, or the Finns liked having a good feeling trigger under their finger, and having shot this thing, I can confirm the trigger feels a lot better than a Russian Mosin Nagant. And then you'll see these sling swivels Originally, this would have just had cuts right where these swivels are. These swivels would have been put in to replace the cuts through the stock, basically to improve strength and reduce the likelihood of it just splintering. But those are your biggest changes. Those and some markings on the rear sight. Occasionally they would be rebarreled. This one was not. Sometimes they would even sleeve the inside of the barrel like what the Italians would do with the Vetterli. We haven't really talked about that particular Italian rifle, or I guess Swiss rifle originally. But, you know, if we ever get one, again, we'll talk about it. But, yeah, that's it's about the extent of the major alterations made. Like I say, this one doesn't have the new barrel. Sometimes you'll see one that has a new barrel, doesn't have the cuts. Sometimes you'll see one that has a replaced sight or something. This appears to be the original M91 sight, just with the markings altered. So, yeah, this is an interesting piece, and kind of the start of a series that I've been very excited to kick off. So let's go ahead and go to the tabletop view and look at some of these markings we've been talking about. So with this gun being Imperial Russian converted to Finnish, you'll see some really interesting markings on the barrel shank, especially since this doesn't appear to have been rebarreled as a lot of the Finn M24s are. So you can see right at the tip of my thumb, that marking there is the Imperial Russian acceptance stamp, and you can see it on the receiver as well. So this is an Imperial Sestroryetsk. At least that's my best stab at pronouncing that word. I do not speak Russian. I have never claimed to. But you can see that this gun was produced in 1913. But then you've got your wonderful Finnish Army Acceptance SA stamp here. And between that and, as I'd already mentioned earlier, the swivels looking like this and not just a slot lengthwise here, that's pretty much what tells you that this was converted to an M24 at some point after the, probably after the Finnish Civil War concluded, as we discussed earlier. So other differences are going to be fairly minor. One major one, you can see this right here would have been the original Russian Arshin's measurement. And you can see there's a scratch through each of these. And then on the other side, you have how the Finns measured things for distance, of which I believe was, it's either yards or meters. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll take a look and post it, you know, over here. But you can see 200, 300, 400, 5,500. Conversion must have been different, not extremely linear with the 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 in Arshins to whatever measurement it was that the Finns were using. But other differences would be mostly internal, like the reworking of the trigger. But this is going to be the first of what will probably be at least 3 times, maybe 4, that we look at this. But bolt extraction is simple. Just pull the bolt back, pull the trigger, and extract the bolt the rest of the way. And it just goes right back in. If the gun jams severely with, because this is a rimmed cartridge, so sometimes you could have a jam severe enough that you couldn't easily fix it from the top. So you could, on the bottom here, there's a button, or not a button, more of a spring that you pull back, and then this magazine opens up. So you could dump your magazine and restart if it was bad enough. And probably by the Finns, this is probably done by the Finns during their re-arsenaling of the gun and all the conversions that it went through. But a lot of times you'll see original serial numbers scratched out and a serial number matching, a lot of times matching the receiver stamped on it, but you can't always tell exactly which parts are going to match and which parts aren't. Sometimes the same part might have been used in 3 or 4 different guns over the course of its life. So they went through a lot of lives and a lot of changes, but it's an interesting piece. Let's go ahead and take this out and show you how to load and shoot it. So loading the Mosin Nagant is nothing particularly difficult. It's actually much like loading an Enfield, of which we've looked at several times. You've got stripper clip with rimmed cartridges. So you want to be careful that the top rim is that side of the bottom rim always, as much as you can. Sometimes, you know, it happens that they're not. Like in my pocket, this one seems to have moved a bit. That should have fixed it, but we'll see. Put the clip inside the cutout in the receiver here, and then a good thing to do is to kind of hold up on this top one and then push down. And then they feed pretty smoothly. If you just try to push straight down, sometimes they'll lock up and not move at all because of the rims in this track. If you push near the end of the bullet in particular, it'll lock up in the track and just not be smooth. So that actually went smoother than expected, actually. But one thing with Mosins, you can't close the bolt over a fully loaded chamber. So, at least not that I'm aware of. It doesn't seem to want to. They don't depress that far. Your safety is this right here. So that's fire, that's safe. So generally you would just have to, if you're carrying the gun loaded, you've just got one in the chamber and the gun on safe. So let's go ahead and take another 5 shots here. See if we can not almost fall over this time. Oh, target fell. Into the hillside. All right. So, got a tree. This is a fun gun, guys. I've never really subscribed to the garbage rod theory of Mosin Nagants. And I will say, with this having been reworked by the Finns, the trigger is nicer on this than it would have been otherwise. Russian triggers were generally fairly crude and sticky. The Finnish did a lot to clean them up and make them function smoother. But otherwise, like in its bones, this is a M91, an old M91, mind you, as we already looked at when we were doing the tabletop demo. This thing's 1913 dated. So it's about the oldest Mosin I think I've ever shot, honestly. It's a fun piece. It's a very cool piece. And yeah. I think next time we're going to be talking about the evolution from here, the M27 and M28, with an example of an M28 courtesy of another friend of mine. I really had a hard time saying that, harder than I should have. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. It's been Thomas of Great Northwest Weaponry, and I'll see you next time.